Alright, so immediately when Snake Eyes were announced for the OCG, we low-key knew trouble was coming. Sometimes you can just read cards and tell they are broken, but I'm not certain we expected the year to be as fire-dominated as it was. We went through a Tier 0 format just for another one to be creeping up on us with Rage of the Abyss, Azamina, and Lacrima the Crimson Tier. Both, of course, being absolutely overpowered support for Snake Eye. So how do we deal with it? Is there even a way of beating it? Today we're going to be answering all of those questions, as well as going through some of the important interactions and choke points of the deck. And hopefully by the end of this video, you have a better idea and understanding of the deck, its end boards, and how to, as best as you can, disrupt it. If you enjoyed the video, of course, make sure to give it a like and let me know if there's anything that I missed that's really important to add. I would love to know your thoughts in the comments, of course. So in order to beat a deck, the first thing we have to do is try and understand what it's trying to accomplish and what the end board is looking like. And that is pretty much it. This is full combo with the Azamina support. And in case you don't know by now, of course, let's go through what Azamina is bringing to the table. Essentially, the most important part of Azamina is Azamina Rea Silvera, or I think it's called something different in the TCG right now, but Silvera is an Omni Negate that you can put up via your one-card combo with the help of the Deception of the Simple Spoils, so you can be protected from any kind of interruption, so your entire Snake Eye combo goes through, because it also bridges to the Snake Eye stuff, which then bridges to Fiendsmith stuff, since you only need 2 monsters to go into Moon anyway. So with the help of Azamina, you can establish your entire combo, remain uninterrupted, and end on a board that's incredibly similar to what we've been seeing Snake Eye do, but you have an Omni Negate on top of it. So the way we have to understand this deck and kind of perceive it is every single time you hand trap it, you're just going to take at least 1 interruption away from it. At this point, we all know Snake Eye is renowned for having 1-card combos, meaning that every single another 1 card is going to establish a very similar thing if they have it. So with Snake Eye Hash going to 1, as well as Poplar going to 1, they still have 3 Bonfire, 3 Wanted, 3 Diabellstar, and there are other combinations of establishing the combo like Oak and Fiendsmith. Fiendsmith by itself is achieving a couple things, not a lot, but still. So every single additional interruption you throw at them is going to result in them having 1 less thing on their end board. If they have access to Azamina cards, they're going to play them immediately just to protect themselves. So if they don't start off with that, then you pretty much know you can disrupt their Snake Eye side of things, because they probably don't have access to Azamina at that point. They're playing 3 Deception as well as Diabellstar and Wanted, which bridge to the Azamina cards since they go hand in hand as part of the archetype. So their combo is consisting of an Omni Negate, another Omni Negate in the form of Desiree, of course. There is the Angel Statue Azrun, which gets brought out by Silhouette Rabbit, and of course is able to negate an inherent summon. I know we all hate that expression, but you know what I'm talking about. And there's of course IP into SP as well, and Princess, not to mention extensive follow-up with the help of Flame Birch. Of course, if you somehow get rid of the field spell, Flame Birch can put out IP Masquerena or the other way around. So taking into account, you have to disrupt them as early as possible. Let's start off on a positive note. Let's talk about some cards that are actually extremely good against them. One of them is Droll. Droll is going to be pretty much the MVP of the next format, because you prevent them access from a lot of things if you Droll them immediately upon the adding of the Hallowed Azamina, which gets added via Deception. So their first card, the 1-card combo, is Deception of the Simple Spoils, like I mentioned a couple of times now, but it adds, which is great for you since you can just Droll and negate them access from Ash into Poplar, Poplar into either the field spell or original. Usually it's going to be the field spell because original gets access through Diabellstar. But in the Azamina combo, you get to Wanted, meaning also the Wanted search is denied. Droll is not as great, actually not great at all in the 1-card combo with Ash, because if you remember from last couple of formats, Droll didn't really hurt Snake Eye as much unless they went Bonfire into Ash, because then for a fact you wouldn't have access to Poplar and the Poplar Surge if you got Drolled. But that's the only exception. When it comes to Azamina cards, just Droll them and you should be fine. They're probably passing, but with Ash and Poplar, it's a little different because you get to that first surge, and when you're able to put either Poplar on the board or go Poplar into the Poplar surge and then get Drolled, you still have enough place to continue going and pretty much end on almost a similar board or pretty much the same board as last format. So Droll is a little weird, but if they have access to Azamina, you should be fine. Another card that's extremely impactful is going to be Fuvaros. Now, Fuvaros is going to shape the meta in its entirety, but when it comes to this deck, what I have seen people do is you kind of have to evaluate your hand and decide how many negates you're able to, negates, disruptions you're able to put up, and how many draws they get from it. If you end on one disruption, you're giving them one draw because your go-to disruption is going to be Silhouette Rabbit into Azrun, which is one summon from the extra deck. If you decide to go for the Azamina route, you're also ending on an Omni Negate and giving them another draw. If you have enough cards, you can end on both, but they have 2 draws at that point. So all of this is to say that the Snake Eye player is going to decide how many draws they're going to give you, but you're going to get at least one, maybe even more, and they're gonna pass on a significantly subpar board. The third card is Shifter. Of course, we know this. Shifter is extremely strong because it denies them any kind of access from the graveyard where most of their plays and extenders are actually stemming from. So Shifter, amazing. Something else that the OCG started playing is Retaliating Sea, because it triggers when you activate the Hallowed Azamina. It's a spell effect that special summons a monster, and if you chain it, you're actually not able to resolve the Hallowed Azamina because the card is going to get banished when they're trying to resolve the effect. If it gets banished, not sent to the graveyard, you don't get to resolve the card, meaning the fusion will actually not be brought out. Let's talk about the graveyard a little more. Another disruption is a Bestial. However, an important thing to keep in mind is that a single Bestial is usually not going to be able to do the job. And with that, we can also bridge to pretty much the underlying topic of this video is please pair your hand traps as best as you can. But when it comes to a Bestial, some of the best points of interaction would be either banishing the fusion once Hallowed Azamina is trying to add itself back to the hand to actually get to Rea Silvera, because if you don't return the fusion, you also don't add back. But in that case, the only thing you're taking away from their end board is their Omni Negate. So if you have more hand traps, sure, you're able to pair them and they might just pass. But if you don't, a single Bestial is not going to do much. Another point of interaction is banishing the sequence once they go through the entire Fiendsmith combo. I know you can be trigger happy and try and banish the Engraver, but what that does is they still have Lacrima and other Light Fiends, so they can just go Lacrima, bring something back in your end phase, and you don't really do much because they have follow-up. If you wait until sequence is in the graveyard trying to be equipped to the Desiree, what happens is they run out of any kind of Light Fiends as well as follow-up. You banish the sequence so they get cut access from it. And also, they have Desiree on the field that's not able to negate Princess. And in the combo, they negate Princess, so you're not fire locked anymore, and you can actually go into Rabbit. But in that case, what they have to do is use or waste Desiree so they can go into Hita and then into Rabbit, because they have to unlock themselves from fire. So they have to go through additional bodies, and you're not going to be forced to deal with the Desiree anyway. So that's very bad for them and great for you, because the last thing they want is to be fire locked because they want to access that Rabbit and the Azurun. But at that point, you're going to be dealing with Azurun. So keep that in mind. Bestials are okay, not insane. Also, Bestials as well as Nibiru are going to be sent away from the Engraver effect. Usually, they're going to try and do that. And Requiem is also able to be equipped to Lacrima as well. So keep that in mind. So when it comes to basic hand traps like Ash, Impermanence, Veiler, you have to do it on the first play. Either Ash the Deception. imperm diffusion, which adds wanted, or just try and deal with the Azamina cards as soon as possible. I know it's not ideal. They're probably ending on almost the full board anyway, like we talked about, but you're forced to do it because if you don't, they have the Omni negate. And when it comes to basic one-card combos like Ash and stuff like that, just try and deal with it as soon as possible, like we've been doing before, because this is literally the safest bet. You put them on better habit, and that's pretty much the way to go. Now, let's talk about Nibiru, because this one is a little tricky. There are a couple situations where it's ideal to Nibiru, and usually that's when they would try to go for their Fiendsmith plays or threaten to go into Princess. You want to prevent either of that from happening, because at that point, if you let them go into Fiendsmith plays and then you Nibiru, they still have the Engraver Revive, and Sequence does not need an effect monster. So Engraver plus token are Sequence, which is then able to continue with their extension. So that's super important to note. And also, you don't want them to have Princess in the graveyard, because they just need one fire and then they can disrupt during your turn. So you would rather prevent that, and you want to Nibiru early. However, another thing they do is they place IP in the spell and trap card zone to be able to be brought out with the field spell with Flame Birch once Flame Birch is on the field for the first time, usually. And they do that just so they can play around the potential Nibiru and have at least one interruption coming out from the spell and trap card zone. So just keep that in mind. They have layered interruptions, so you're probably going to be dealing with IP into SP anyway. Another thing is that usually you would wait until you resolve Nibiru, so they have wasted their Flamebird Revive, the ability to special summon from the spell and trap card zone, all of that. But a lot of times you actually cannot do that, because at that point they are already threatening going into Fiendsmith plays and Princess plays. So what ends up happening is they have extension and they can push through your Nibiru fairly easily, but at least you cut them access from a couple things. So again, pair your hand traps. Please, it's literally the best you can do. Also, the rabbit can be made with 2 effect monsters. Please don't get cheated, but usually they're gonna be ending on it through disruption anyway, because it's fairly easy to establish a couple bodies. Now let's just run through a couple general pieces of advice, which I've seen the OCG do, and we might see the same things happening here, and some of these cards might actually help you. So Cyframe Gear, Gamma and Delta, the entire package with Driver, is actually kind of nice because it's very generic and it can be used against this deck as well. Deception, any kind of monster effect. There's also Power-Sing Stone and Skill Drain. I know Skill Drain went to 1, but Power-Sing Stone is actually really powerful because they have a lot of effects that are like 2 effects built into 1. If, for example, you would go Poplar, effect to special summon itself from the hand, on the field it's going to activate to search. Immediately you're at 2 counters, so Power-Sing Stone is nice. There's also Deck Lockdown, very similar to Droll. We've been seeing this trend from before, but since we were talking about trap cards before, something I also want to point out and kind of warn you about is the fact that Snake Eye is probably going to be playing trap cards as well. They tend to run Skill Drain or like a couple one-offs of powerful floodgates that they can afford to run, because they're playing with the idea in mind that they're going to get disrupted anyway. So if you expect them to side some trap cards, you have to be prepared for that as well. Now, if you're playing Tempai Dragon, something that OCG started doing is playing Heatwave. It's super, super impactful, and you can decide for yourself if that is something that you want to do. There's also Ghost Ogre, which is really nice against Deception, but it's a little niche. You can still include it if you want to, but I think it's going to be even better post some of the new decks drop, which are dominating the OCG right now, because Ogre is good against them as well as Snake Eye, and that's kind of the reason why Snake Eye went down in popularity in the OCG a bit. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We haven't even gotten Rage of the Abyss yet. Now, something else I want to talk about is the Dominus cards. Either Purge or Impulse are going to be super impactful. They do have specific effects, but they can be used to negate some of the Snake Eye plays. Something to keep in mind though is Impulse locks you from light monsters as well as wind monsters. So you have to think about using Nibiru, Veiler, and Droll as soon as possible so you don't get locked out of your own effects via impulse. Different dimension ground is super nice. This is something we've been seeing from before. You can also pair it up with thrust if you decide to go for some thrust targets. DDG is super solid. And now just a couple words to round the video off about board breakers. What I've seen is board breakers don't really seem to do as much. You end on a negate anyway, so at that point you're just trading with a negate. If you're playing a deck like Tempai Dragon, which can play a lot of board breakers and a combination of hand traps, that's great. But that's not going to be the case for most of the decks, so keep that in mind. One evenly or a droplet is not going to save you, especially because for a droplet you would have to get rid of multiple cards since they put up so many disruptions on the board. And like I keep mentioning, their disruption is layered. So even if you try your best and deal with their field of monsters, there's still the IP to be pushed out with the field spell. Princess in the Graveyard that's just lurking there. So board breakers are not really the approach. Hand traps are going to be the way to go. So if you can play a deck that is able to fit preferably 15, maybe even more hand traps, at that point, you're maximizing your chances of drawing multiples, which is going to be super important. So you can actually pair them together. But like I keep pointing out, please make sure to do it as early as possible. So I think that's pretty much going to be it. I know there's probably more to talk about, but I don't want this video to be like half an hour long because there's a couple intricate things this deck is doing, and I think a lot more things are going to come out as the format develops. But just for some general tips right now, I think this video should do. So hopefully it was helpful. Let me know if you learned anything. And again, if you have any of your own important cards to point out, please mention them in the comments. And like the video if you enjoy it. It really helps the channel. And I'll be making much more ROTA content as well. So if there's anything specific you would want me to make, I will gladly do so. So yeah, again, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.